Hello, and welcome to the second part of this Blender Smoothie tutorial series on creating a Christmas tree in Blender. In this part, we're going to be taking a look at shading the tree and adding the textures and all those other things. So we're going to get started by texturing the tree trunk and the branches. To do this, you're going to need a texture from somewhere, whether it's a photo that you take or a download from CG Textures or something. I'm going to be using an image from CG Textures, and I'll post a link to that exact image in the description of this video if you want to follow along with the exact same picture. So we'll get started by first selecting the tree trunk here and all the branches that go along with it. We're going to start by just working with the trunk itself and not the rest of the branches, so before we do anything else, press Tab to go into edit mode. And, forgot. We still had all those branches hidden from the other time when we were working with the tree trunk. It's always a good idea because it speeds up the viewport a little bit. Then I'm going to split my view, and I'm going to change this right window to the UV image editor. And I'm going to over image and open a new image. Okay, let's see here. Gotta find it. It's on desktop. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is create a texture seam. We're not going to actually, you know what? Let's isolate this. Tab back into object mode and press M to move, and we're going to move it to another layer. And the reason I'm doing this is so that we can isolate the tree trunk from all the other pine needles. So we can get rid of the texture seam a little easier. So press Tab again to go into edit mode. And just select any edge on here, it doesn't really matter. Maybe this one. We'll create a seam by pressing Control E, mark seam. And maybe scroll back out a little bit. Select everything, U to unwrap. Now since we're using the Cycles render engine, the texture isn't going to show up in the viewport until we actually create a shader for it to work with. So let's do that really quickly. I'm going to split my window this way, change this upper window to the node editor, add a new material, zoom in a little bit, move that over, and add an image texture right there. Connect those and load your texture. Now if we go over to textured view, there it is. You can see it showed up right there. It's kind of hard to see, but just like that. Alright. So now obviously we need to scale it up here in the image editor because it's way too tiny, which means the texture is way too huge across the trunk. Maybe something more like that. Take a look at that. Alright, maybe even bigger than that. Something more like that. Yeah, that works. Alright, no. I actually don't know that we need to clean up the texture seam. Not seeing it. Yeah. Okay. I guess in this case we don't have to do any cleanup work on the texture seam. It's pretty well hidden. So, yeah, I guess that's all we have to do for the tree trunk. Now to tackle the tree branches, it's a little harder. First of all, press Tab to go back into edit mode, and Alt H to unhide everything. Actually, you know what? Undo that. Press A to deselect the tree trunk, then press Alt H to select, or to unhide everything. So now we have all the branches selected and not the tree trunk selected. And basically, what the best thing to do in this case is typically to just project it from a certain view. There'll be some slight texture stretching on the sides of the branches or the tops or bottoms of the branches, but it's going to be really subtle, and when you put all the needles and ornaments and everything like that over top of it, no one's going to notice. So press 7 to go to top view, center this a little bit more maybe, and press U, project from view. And this, okay, I was expecting it to take a little longer. But as you can see, it basically just mapped what we're viewing in the top view here right onto the image in the image editor over here. Again, it's way too small. We have to scale it up. It is kind of slow to respond there. Maybe something like that. Press tab to go back into object mode to see this. Okay. Yeah, so you can see there's some texture stretching on the sides there a little bit. But for the most part, it looks pretty good. We'll press tab to go back into edit mode and scale it up a little more because it's still kind of, textures are kind of big on there. Maybe something like that. Okay, that works. Alright, since we still have the tree trunk and everything selected, we might as well just work on the shader for this one too now, before we move on to the pine needles. So we need a light to work with first of all. So I'm going to add a plane, move it up over there maybe, right about there, and I'm going to, whoa, move that over. Probably drag that up a little bit more. Okay. We still have that selected, so let's come up here and add a new shader, delete the diffuse, add an emission instead. Alright, and so in case you're not familiar with these shaders, that just casts light from the object. We can come down here and change the preview to rendered. And hope that Blender doesn't crash because it's running kind of slow. Okay, we need to increase the strength quite a bit because it's not noticeable. Try 100 first. It's starting to show up a little bit. Maybe 500. Alright, that's probably too much. 250. Maybe 200. We won't know for sure until we have the needles and everything, but for now that looks pretty good. And the only thing left that we have to do really is add a bump map. And you can sort of see the texture seam, I think, showing up a little bit there. Can't tell for sure though. But again, that'll all be covered by the needles and everything. So let's select the tree. And we should probably drag that down a little bit more. Basically, we just need to connect this image to the displacement input on there. It's probably too strong though. If we were to take a look at it now. Yeah, we could probably tone that down a little bit. So we have to add a converter math node. Basically, got to connect those like that. There we go. Change this to multiply, and now we can adjust this value here to adjust the strength of the bump mapping. So let's try 0.25 actually. Alright, that looks pretty good. Okay, so the tree trunk shader, or the tree bark shader is done. Let's give it a name. We'll just call it tree bark. And we can move on to the needles now. So, since we already have the light and everything over here, we might as well just move these needles over to the second layer. Okay. So basically with these needles, we're going to want to have a little bit of translucency. Not too much, probably not as much as we would with broadleafs, because the needles are a bit thicker. But we do still want a tiny bit of translucency. We also want a little bit of gloss. Not too much again, but just enough to give it a little bit of shininess. So select the needles. Selected the tree trunk there on accident. Okay. needles right there, and add a new shader. I'm going to exit rendered view for now, just so this runs a little faster. And we're going to start by selecting a color for this diffuse shader here. We want a little bit of maybe an olive green kind of color, something right around there. Try something like that. Maybe even a little darker. Let's see how that looks. Alright, yeah, that's too green. Maybe something more like that. Okay. That's a lot better. Yeah, we'll stick with that for now. Alright. So at this point it's looking pretty good. A lot better than it did to begin with. But we still need to add the translucency and the glossiness and all those other things. So in the node editor, press Shift-A to add, and we're going to add a translucent shader to start with. And I'm just going to start by clicking the eyedropper tool and essentially just copying that color there. But we do want this one to be a little different. Generally in translucency, especially in leaves and needles, the light that's shining through on the other side is a little more yellow. So maybe we'll want to move it in that direction a little bit. Maybe something like that. There we go. And then maybe we'll make this a little more green as well to sort of counteract that. Maybe darken it a bit too. Lighten that a little bit. Okay. And now we just need to combine these. So we're going to press Shift-A and add a mix shader. And we'll combine those two. Okay. So already the needles are looking a little more organic, which is the look that we were going for. Maybe we can increase the brightness of that a little more. We want to decrease the factor. The higher this factor is, then the more of this shader there is. The lower this factor is, the more of this there is. So we want to lower this a little bit so there's a little less translucency. Maybe just something like that. Angle this so we're sort of looking behind the tree a little bit. And that looks about right. That's a pretty good level of translucency there. So we'll stick with that. And now the only thing left to add is the glossiness. And surprisingly, this is one of the hardest things to get right. Because you would think it would be pretty easy, but since there are all those different little needles, the light can look kind of weird sometimes when it's reflecting off. So you want to be very careful when working with glossy shaders in this case. So we'll start by adding a new glossy shader. And we'll just duplicate this mix node. Combine those two. Okay, so yeah, you could see right off the bat, it doesn't look like light shining off. It looks like some of the needles are just white, which is kind of weird. So basically, first of all, we want to probably increase that a little more. And we're going to adjust the roughness to maybe 0.35. Maybe even a little more than that, maybe like 0.45. So that looks pretty good. Now we'll decrease it a little bit, 0.375. And now we just want to adjust the factor until we get something that looks right, maybe 0.05. And that looks pretty good. It's not too noticeable, but there is just a little bit of sheen to these needles, and that helps a lot with the shader. So that pretty much concludes this part of the tutorial on shading the Christmas tree. I hope you learned something from it, and in the next part we're going to be going over lights. So that's all. Thanks for watching.